G'day mate, 40 here. So I was just walking around the lush campus here at UCLA and watching people throw a football around. It reminded me of one of the first social events that I attended when I went to UCLA in the fall of 1988. I got into a game of touch frisbee. And early on in the game, as I was leaping for the frisbee, I came down and I twisted and badly sprained my right ankle. And I came up and I tried to walk it off, and then some UCLA security guy said, you can't play frisbee here, and he pointed at me for the reason, that in case you get injured, the university doesn't want to get sued. And he pointed at me and said, it's for this very reason, you just got injured, we don't want to get sued. And so that was one of the biggest differences I noticed between Australia and America, is the level of fear in America compared to the level of fear in Australia. So in America, there's tremendous fear of litigation to an extent virtually unknown in Australia. I just didn't hear about fear of litigation in my Seventh-day Adventist Australian upbringing. And insurance premiums and all sorts of normal interactions between people are changed and rendered much more artificial in America because of fear of litigation. So in Australia, you don't go and get private insurance for your car. I believe there's no fault insurance, and the state covers it, and it's just part of what you pay for your registration fees every year is essentially car insurance. And so there aren't private attorneys trying to make money out of car accidents. So much less fear of litigation in Australia compared to America. Maybe 1/10 the amount of fear of litigation in Australia compared to America. Then probably 1/20th the fear of crime in Australia compared to America. There's virtually nowhere you can't go in Sydney. Sydney is the fourth safest city in the world, I read when I was down under recently. So there's virtually no fear of crime in Australia. There's virtually no fear of litigation. And there's no fear of being without health insurance. So every Australian citizen and lawful resident of Australia is covered by Australia's social security medical system. There's government provided socialized medicine. And so in America, there's tremendous fear of what happens if you don't have health insurance. And there just isn't that fear in Australia. Also, what happens if you lose your job? So if you're a man, particularly in America, and you lose your job, the only way that you can get ongoing payments from the government are if you can get yourself declared eligible for Social Security disability. And then once you get on that, you can almost never get off. But in Australia, I can go back and I can immediately get on the dole. I can go back to Australia, and while I look for work, I can immediately get payments. And so there's virtually no fear of crime in Australia, virtually no fear of litigation. There's no fear of being without your health insurance. And there's no fear of the most dire poverty and homelessness, because everybody can get on the dole. It's very easy to just go on the dole while you're looking for a job. And so there's not the same fear of losing your job in Australia, because there's much more of a government welfare state to support you. So no fear of hunger, no fear of homelessness, no fear of crime, no fear of litigation. So life is much more set out for you in a clear way in Australia. So the educational system, by and large, employs tracking. So the smart kids, get sent off on a smart track. And Australia is the great love I've never known, says Josh. So fairly early on, you start getting tracked. And so the smart kids, the ones who are going to end up at university, they go to the smart classes, and the ones who are going to end up tradies, they go to the regular classes. So your life is much more set out for you in Australia. And you also have much more of a sense of community, high social trust, high social cohesion, high social capital, and you have your mates. There's much more of a sense of mateship and camaraderie in Australia. so you can turn to each other during tough times. So I would say that's one of the biggest emotional differences, is that there's far more fear in America. It's kind of the downside of Americans' individualist approach to life. So the Australian and the European approach is much more corporate. It's much more communal. And in America, there's much more emphasis on individual success and be all you can be. Just like really go for it. Chase your dreams. But there's much less of a social safety net underneath to catch you if you fall. And people lead much more individual lives, kind of cut off from other people in wider society in America, while mateship and the corporate cohesive social way of life is much more ingrained in Australia. So fewer choices in Australia. It's much more of a sense that we're all in it together in Australia. So in America, life is much more divided by tribes. So being an American isn't a primary identity. You're a Jewish American, you're Italian American, you're a lawyer American, you're a basketball American. But there's not nearly as much sense of loyalty and comradeship with the wider society. And I think that also breeds fear. Also, much more dramatic immigration levels in America. It's much less in control compared to Australia. Look, the prices of houses have exponentially increased in the last 12 months. Yeah, but people aren't in fear of not being able to buy a house in the big city. All right, that's not something that you tend to be fearful about. So, like, that's like a luxury fear. Now, Australia is a neoliberal capitalist, mix of capitalism and socialism. So it's not immune from the business cycle and from developments in the world around it. Americans don't have a fear of being invaded, right? So Australia would be much more vulnerable to, say, a Chinese invasion theoretically. Americans don't have that fear, but Australians don't walk around with a fear of being invaded either. So in Australia, you have much more of a sense that you're separate from the rest of the world, that you're surrounded by ocean, and that other people are far, far away. Bye-bye.